Welcome back, everybody. I hope you've had a good Semana Santa. We're going to continue with our read alouds via YouTube videos. I will make them and I'll post them up every week. We're more than halfway through the book, so I think just a few more sessions we'll be able to finish it. But I didn't want to leave everyone hanging. So I want to remind everyone where we left off in our reading of The Three Investigators and the Mystery of the Flaming Footprints. When we left, Jupiter and Bob were caught in the hilltop house with General Kaluk and Dmitriev, his servant. They were being interrogated and they were questioning Jupiter because they didn't believe that he didn't know where the potter was. They had a belt around Jupiter, and Dmitriev pulled out a gun and were threatening them. So let's pick up the story. I'll go back a page and pick up from there. Now you will tell me about the potter, said the general. Where is he? The belt tightened around Jupiter's head. I don't know, said Jupiter. He simply walked away from your salvage yard and was not seen again? The general was almost sneering. Yes, that's what happened. The belt tightened some more. And he was expecting guests, these friends you speak of, these friends to whom you were so helpful. Yeah, that's right. And your police have done nothing, demanded the general. They have not looked for this man who walked away. It's a free country, said Jupiter. If the potter chooses to walk away, he's entitled to do. A free country? The general blinked and ran a hand over his hairless chin. Yes, I've heard that before. He said nothing to you. You swear it. He said nothing, declared Jupiter. He stared straight at the general, unblinking. I see. The general stood up and walked over to Jupiter. He looked at him for half a minute and then sighed. Very well, Dmitriev, we will let them go. He is telling the truth. The younger man protested. It's mad! It's too much of a coincidence! The general shrugged. A pair of children, curious as all children are curious. They know nothing. The belt was removed from Jupiter's head. Bob, who had not realized that he was holding his breath, let out a great gasp of relief. We should call your excellent police, who do not look for people, snapped Dmitriev. We should tell them that you have broken the law. You have trespassed on this property. What? You talk about breaking the law, exclaimed Bob. If we told what happened here tonight, you will not tell, said the general. What really happened tonight? I asked about the famous artisan, and you informed me that you did not know his whereabouts. What could be more natural? The man has achieved some fame. He has been written about in your periodicals. As for this, the general tossed the gun in his hand. As for this, Mr. Dmitriev has a permit for the gun, and you were trespassing. Nothing has occurred. We are being generous. You may go now, and do not return. Bob was up instantly, pulling Jupiter along with him. You find it convenient to use the lane, said the general. And remember, we will be watching you go. The boys did not speak until they were away from the house, and hurrying down the drive that led from the hilltop house to the driveway, to the main highway. Never again, exclaimed Bob. Jupiter looked up and back at the stone buttress of the terrace. Dmitriev and the general stood there, playing in the moonlight, motionless and watching. Malignant pair, said Jupiter. I have a distinct feeling that General Kaluk has presided over some other inquisitions. Yeah, if you mean that he's used to giving the third degree to people, I couldn't agree more, said Bob. Nice that you have an honest face. Well, it was even nicer to tell the truth, said Jupiter. Yeah, well, you did do that, didn't you? I tried. One can consider one's daughter a friend from the Midwest. The road curved then, and the hilltop house was lost to sight behind a clump of bush on the boys' left. And then, from lower on the hill, there was a muffled sound and a blast of flame. Something or some things whizzed over Bob's head and spattered into the brush. "Get down!" cried Jupiter. Bob dropped on his face, Jupiter beside him. The two waited, not daring to move. There was a crackling in the underbrush off to the right. Then there was quiet, except for the scolding of a night bird. "Buckshot?" wondered Bob. "Yeah, I think so," Jupiter decided. He got to his hands and knees and crawled forward until they had rounded yet another turn in the lane. Bob followed him. When they had gone perhaps 50 yards in this fashion, both boys leaped up and ran for the main road. The gate at the bottom of the drive was closed, and they did not pause to see whether the lock was in place. Jupiter climbed over, and Bob hurdled the barrier in one leap. The two raced down the road to the Potter's gate and burst through that, stopping only when they had reached the shelter of the Potter's front porch. "That shot," gasped Jupiter. "It couldn't have come from Hilltop House. Dmitriev's and the General were standing on the terrace there as we came around the bend in the road." He stopped to let his breathing quiet. "Then someone was waiting on the hill with a gun, Bob. There's a third man involved." Chapter 11. The Ghost Returns. Jupiter Jones had his hand on the doorbell of the Potter's house when a window upstairs was thrown open and Eloise Dobson's voice called out. "Who's there?" Miss Dobson demanded. Jupiter stepped back away from the door and out from under the roof of the porch. "It's Jupiter Jones, Miss Dobson, and Bob Andrews is with me." "Oh," she said. "Just a second." The window slammed shut. An instant later, Jupe and Bob heard locks turning and bolts being drawn back. The door opened, and Pete looked out. "What's up?" he demanded. "Let us in and keep calm," said Jupiter in a low voice. "Why, I am calm. What's the matter?" Pete replied. Jupe and Bob stepped into the hall. "I don't want to alarm Miss Dobson unnecessarily," said Jupiter quickly, "but the men of Hilltop House—" Jupiter broke off when Miss Dobson appeared at the top of the stairs and started down. "Did you hear a loud bang a minute ago, Jupiter?" she asked. "Like a shot?" It was only a backfire on the road," said Jupiter quickly. "Miss Dobson, you haven't met our friend Bob Andrews." "Oh, how do you do, Miss Dobson?" said Bob. Miss Dobson smiled and came the rest of the way down the stairs. "I'm glad to meet you, Bob," she said. "What brings you two here so late?" Tom Dobson came down the stairs carrying a tray piled with empty cups. "Hey, Jupe," he said. Again, Jupiter introduced Bob. "Aha," said Tom. "The third investigator." "The what?" said Miss Dobson. Nothing, Mom," said Tom. It's just a joke. Well, kind of." Miss Dobson looked at her son in the searching manner peculiar to mothers. "We can do without jokes right now," she said. "What are you boys up to?" "It's not that I don't appreciate your trouble. It's very nice to have Pete spend the night with us, but let's not have any secrets, okay?" "I'm sorry, Miss Dobson," said Jupiter. "Bob and I hadn't planned to come here tonight. However, we were hiking along the path at the top of the hill, and we could not help but notice the men at Hilltop House." Bob choked. Jupiter continued calmly. "Hilltop House is the big place almost directly behind this house, but up near the crest of the hill. 2 new tenants moved into the place yesterday, and from the terrace they can look directly into the back bedrooms in this house. The thought came to us that you'd wish to know of this, so that you can keep the window blinds down." "Oh, that's just great," said Miss Dobson, and sat down on the stairs. "It just makes the day perfect. First, we get flaming footprints, and then that nut from the inn, and now a couple of peeping Toms." "Nut from the inn?" questioned Bob. What nut? From what inn?" It's the guy named Ferrier," answered Pete. "He popped up about a half an hour ago, and he said he wanted to see if Miss Dobson and Tom got moved in okay, and if there was anything he could do for them." "Oh, the jolly fisherman," said Jupiter. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's too jolly for words, said Miss Dobson. For some reason, he gives me the creeps. Why is he trying so hard? He smiles so much my face aches just watching him, and he's always so splendid, said Jupiter. I guess you could say splendid. Miss Dobson put her chin in her hands and rested her elbows on her knees. He looks like, well, like one of those dummies in a department store. I don't think he sweats. Anyhow, he tried to invite himself in for coffee. I told him I was planning to lie down with a cold cloth on my head, and he took the hint and went away. He was driving? Said Jupiter. Well, sure, said Pete. It was an old tan Ford. He went up on the road. Said Jupiter. No reason why he shouldn't take a drive along the ocean. Well, we'd better get home. See you tomorrow, Miss Dobson. Good night, boys, said Miss Dobson. She took the tray of dirty cups from Tom and headed to the kitchen. Jupiter quickly filled in Tom and Pete on the full events at Hilltop House and the subsequent gunshot. He warned them again about keeping the blinds down. After Jupe and Bob went out, they could hear the sound of locks being locked and bolts being bolted. Well, I think I'm extremely pleased that the Potter equipped his house so well with locks, said Jupiter. The boys began to walk back to Rocky Beach on the shoulder of the road. Hey, do you think Pete and the Dobsons are in any real danger? Wondered Bob. No, I don't. The men at Hilltop House may be curious about them, but we know now that they're really interested in the Potter, and that they're aware that the Potter is not at home. Yeah, but what about the guy on the hill? Said Bob. You know, the one who took a shot at us? Well, we were the ones who were threatened, said Jupiter. It doesn't appear that he menaced the Dobsons in any way. It's interesting that Mr. Ferrier has been so persistent in his attentions to Mrs. Dobson. She's certainly not encouraged him, and Aunt Matilda was positively rude to him this afternoon. Most people don't intrude when they're clearly unwelcome. And that tan Ford truck is also very interesting. There must be 1 million of those around, said Bob. Why is it interesting? Well, because it doesn't match the rest of the man, explained Jupiter. As Mrs. Dobson agreed, he's quite splendid in his appearance. One would expect him to drive something more elegant. A foreign sports car, perhaps, and although he seems to be meticulous about his own appearance, he's not even troubled to have his car washed. The lights of Rocky Beach gleamed ahead, and the boys walked faster, suddenly fearful that Aunt Matilda might be looking for them. The Jones house was quiet, however, when the boys reached it. Jupiter peered in through the window to see his Uncle Titus still napping contently as an old movie unfolded on the TV screen. Hey, come over with me and we'll close up the yard for the night, said Jupiter to Bob. The boys went across and in and through the big iron gates. The light burned brightly in Jupiter's outdoor workshop. As Jupiter reached to turn it off, a red light over the printing press suddenly flashed furiously off and on. This was the signal that the telephone in headquarters was ringing. What? At this hour? Exclaimed Bob. Now who could... Pete, said Jupiter. It could only be Pete. He tore aside the grating that covered Tunnel 2. In seconds, he and Bob were inside headquarters, and Jupiter had snatched up the telephone. Come back! Pete's voice sounded thin and shaky over the wire. It's happening again. More footprints? Said Jupiter tersely. 3 of them on the stairs, said Pete. I put them out, and there's a funny smell. Also, Miss Dobson's having hysterics. We'll be right there, promised Jupiter. He hung up the telephone. Another set of naming footprints, he told Bob, on the stairs this time. Also, Pete reports that Miss Dobson is having hysterics, which is not surprising. Back we go? Questioned Bob. Yep, back we go, said Jupiter. The boys hurried out through Tunnel 2 and were just locking the gate of the salvage yard when Aunt Matilda opened the door of the Jones house. What are you boys doing over there all this time? She called. Just sorting things out, Jupiter called back. He turned away from the gate and ran across to his aunt. We thought we might ride up and see how the Mrs. Dobson and Tom are getting along," he said. "Do you mind?" "Yes, I do," said Aunt Matilda. "It's too late to go out visiting. And Jupiter, you know I don't like to have you on that busy road after dark." "But the bikes have lights," Jupiter pointed out, "and we'll be careful. Miss Dobson was so upset this afternoon, we thought we might just check in on her and see if she's settled comfortably." Well, all right, Jupiter, but you boys be careful." And she stopped suddenly. "Hey, where's Pete?" she asked. He left," said Jupiter shortly. All right. Well, if you're going, hurry. It's not getting any earlier. And remember, be careful." "We'll remember," promised Jupiter. With the bicycles, the return trip to the Potter's house took only a few minutes. Bob and Jupiter pounded on the front door and called out, and Pete let them in. "Did you search the house?" Jupiter asked. "By myself?" said Pete. "Are you crazy? Besides, I've been busy. I've had a set of burning footprints to put out and a trip to the telephone on the main road to call you guys. And Mrs. Dobson's going out of her head." Indeed, Mrs. Dobson was not herself. Bob and Jupiter followed Pete upstairs to the big front bedroom, where the brass bed had been put up. Miss Dobson was stretched out on the bed, face down, and sobbing bitterly. Young Tom Dobson sat beside her, patting her shoulder and looking highly nervous. Bob slipped into the bathroom, turned on the cold water tap, and soaked the washcloth. "There it goes again," cried Miss Dobson. "There what goes?" asked Jupiter. It stopped," Miss Dobson said. "The water was running someplace." "I did that, Miss Dobson." Bob came in, carrying the wet cloth. I thought you might use this." "Oh." She took the cloth and dabbed at her face. Yeah, just after you left," Pete explained. "We could hear water running in the pipes, but every tap in the house was turned off. Then we were all about to turn in and go to bed, and there was this sound downstairs like a thud. Miss Dobson came out to see what was up, and there was these 3 fires on the stairs. I smothered them with a blanket, and we've got another set of footprints." Jupiter and Bob returned to the stairs to examine the charred remarks. "Exactly like the ones in the kitchen," said Jupiter. He touched one, and then sniffed his fingerprints. Peculiar odor. Chemicals of some type. "Yeah, so what does that get us?" demanded Pete. "We've got a ghost with a PhD in chemistry?" "It's probably too late," Jupiter said, "but I suggest that we search the house." "Jupe, nobody could have gotten in here," insisted Pete. "This place is locked up tighter than the vault at Bank America." Jupiter insisted, however, and the house was searched from cellar to attic. Except for the Dobsons, the 3 investigators, and a vast amount of ceramic art, the place was completely empty. "I want to go home," said Eloise Dobson. "Well, we'll go, Mom," promised Tom. We'll go in the morning, okay?" "What's the matter with right now?" asked Miss Dobson. "You're tired, Mom." "You think I could sleep in a place like this?" demanded Miss Dobson. "Miss Dobson, would you feel safer if we all stayed tonight?" asked Jupiter Jones. Eloise Dobson shivered and stretched out on the brass bed, kicking at the floorboard with her stocking feet. "Yes, I'd feel safer," she admitted. "Do you suppose we could ask the fire department up for the night, too?" Well, let's hope we don't need them," said Jupiter. "Try to rest, okay, Mom?" Tom paddled out to the linen closet for an extra blanket. He covered his mother, who was still wearing the blouse and shirt she had on from that afternoon. "I ought to get up and undressed," said Miss Dobson wearily. She didn't, however, and she put one arm over to cover her eyes. "Don't turn out the light," she said. "Okay, we won't," said Tom. "And don't go away," she muttered. "I'll stay right here, Mom," said Tom. Miss Dobson said nothing more. She dropped into an exhausted sleep. The boys tiptoed out to the landing. "I'll get another blanket and sleep on the floor in Mom's room," said Tom softly. Will you guys really stay all night? Yeah, I'll telephone Aunt Matilda, announced Jupiter, and I'll inform her that your mother is feeling rather upset and wishes company. And perhaps she can call Mrs. Andrews. No, I'll call my mom, said Bob. Excuse me. I could just tell her I'm staying over with you. Well, hey, maybe we should call the police, said Tom. So far that's done no good, Jupiter told him. Lock the door after us when we go to the call box. Hey, don't worry, said Pete. I'll rap 3 times when we come back, said Jupiter, and then I'll wait and rap 3 more times. Got it. Pete unlocked and bolted the door, and Jupiter and Bob slipped out into the night, crossed the potter's yard, and went into the call box on the main road. Aunt Matilda was more than concerned when she learned that Miss Dobson was upset and wanted company. Jupiter didn't want to mention the second set of flaming footprints to her. He spent the better part of his 3 minutes persuading her not to rouse Uncle Titus and have him come with the truck to collect the Dobsons and remove them bodily to the security and comfort of the Joneses' house. Mrs. Dobson's asleep now, Jupiter said finally. She only said she'd feel better if we all stayed in the house with her. There aren't enough beds, argued Aunt Matilda. Well, we'll make do, said Jupiter. Look, it'll be all right. Aunt Matilda finally subsided and gave Jupiter the telephone, Jupiter gave the telephone to Bob, who simply received permission from his mother to spend the night with Jupiter. The boys went back to the Potter's house, rapped the agreed-upon raps, which were admitted by Pete. As Aunt Matilda had pointed out, there were not enough beds to go around, not even with Tom Dobson sleeping on the floor in his mother's room. Pete did not see this as an obstacle. One of them, he decided, should be on watch at all times. 2 would sleep. They could take turns. Bob and Jupiter both felt that sentinel duty might be an excellent idea, and Jupe volunteered for the first watch, which was to be for 3 hours. Bob disappeared into the Potter's bedroom to stretch out on the Potter's narrow, immaculate bunk bed, and Pete vanished into the room which had been prepared for Tom. Jupe stationed himself in the hall at the head of the stairs. He sat down on the floor, leaned back against the wall, and stared speculatively at the charred marks on the steps, the marks of bare feet. He sniffed at his own fingers. The chemical smell which he had noticed when he first touched the footprints was gone. Doubtless some extremely volatile mixture had been used to create the flames. Jupe wondered idly what it had been, and then decided that the substance itself wasn't important. What was important was that someone had come into a locked house, and double-locked house, and to create the eerie and terrifying effect. How it had been done, and by whom? Of one thing Jupiter Jones was sure. No ghost was playing a devilish prank. Jupiter Jones refused to believe in ghosts. Chapter 12. The Secret Library. Jupiter wakened in Tom Dobson's bed and heard a determined clanking and slamming and clattering from the kitchen below. He groaned slightly, turned over, and looked at his watch. It was after 7. You awake? Bob Andrews was looking in through the doorway. I am now. Jupiter got up slowly. Miss Dobson's furious, reported Bob. She's down cooking breakfast. That's good. I could use some breakfast. What's she furious about? Last night she only wanted to go home. Not this morning. This morning she's ready to take the town of Rocky Beach apart. Wonderful what a good night's sleep will do for a person. Come on down. You'll enjoy it. Reminds me of your Aunt Matilda in one of her more active moods. Jupiter chuckled and went into the bathroom and splashed some water on his face, put on his shoes, which were all he had bothered to remove the night before, and followed Bob down to the kitchen. Pete and Tom were already sitting there watching as Eloise Dobson dealt with some bacon and eggs. She was relieving herself of numerous opinions about the Potter, the house, the naming footprints, and the ingratitude of a father who disappeared when his only daughter had taken the trouble to drive almost all the way across town the country to see him. And don't think I'm going to let him get away with it, said Miss Dobson. I'm not. I'm going down to the police station this morning and file a missing person report on him, and then they'll have to look for him." "Will that do any good, Miss Dobson?" Jupiter questioned. "If the Potter's missing because he wishes to be missing, it's difficult to see—" "I don't wish him to be missing," interrupted Miss Dobson. She set a platter of fried eggs and bacon on the table. "I'm his daughter, and he is my father, and he'd better get used to it. And that police chief of yours had darn well better do something about those footprints, too. That has to be a crime." "Arson, I imagine," said Bob. "Well, call it whatever you like. It's got to stop. Now, you boys eat. I'm going to town." "Mom, you didn't have any breakfast," protested Tom. "Who needs it?" snapped his mother. "Eat. Go ahead. And stay put for Pete's sake. I'll be right back." She snatched up her bag, which had been laid on top of the refrigerator, rummaged for car keys, and then strode down the hall and out the door. A second later, the boys heard the engine of the blue convertible. "Mom kind of gets a second wind," said Tom, a little embarrassed. "Good eggs," said Jupiter. He had served himself while he was on his feet, leaning now against the doorway. "I think we'd better do the dishes before she gets back." "Your years with Aunt Matilda have given you a second sense of psychology," Bob said. "Well, your mother is, of course, quite justified in being angry with your grandfather," Jupiter told young Tom. "However, I don't believe the Potter wanted to hurt her. He never wanted to hurt anybody. A lonely person, but very gentle, I think." Jupiter put down his plate in the sink and remembered again the men in the Cadillac and their confrontation with the Potter. He remembered the Potter standing in the driveway of the salvage yard, holding his medallion with his hand. "The double-headed eagle," said Jupiter. "Tom, you said your grandfather sometimes sent you things which he had made. Did he ever send you anything with a double-headed eagle?" Tom thought for a minute and then shook his head. Mom likes birds," he told Jupiter. "He sent things with birds on them mostly, but just regular birds, robins and bluebirds. No freaks like that plaque upstairs." "But he wore the eagle on the medallion," said Jupiter, "and he used it when he designed that plaque, and a plaque for an empty room, incidentally. Now, why would he go to the trouble to make a huge thing like that and install it in an empty room?" Jupiter wiped his hands on his tea towel and started for the stairs. The other boys instantly abandoned their breakfasts and followed him up into the room which had been occupied by Miss Dobson. The crimson eagle glared at them from above the mantel. Jupiter felt around the edges of the plaque. It seems to be cemented into place," he said. Tom Dobson ducked back into his own room and returned with a nail file. "Hey, try this, Jupe," he said. Jupe pried at the edges of the ceramic piece. No, it's up there to stay," he announced. "I think the Potter must have replastered the wall above the fireplace and put the plaque right into the plaster." Jupe stepped back and looked up at the screaming bird. What a job that must have been. This is a very large piece." "Well, everybody's got to have a hobby," Tom said. "Wait," said Jupiter. It isn't cast all in one piece. We need something to stand on." Pete darted down to the kitchen and came back with one of the chairs. Jupiter stood on it and reached up toward the right head of the eagle. "Yeah, the eye isn't the same as the other," he said. "It was cast separately." Jupiter pressed on the white porcelain of the eagle's eye. It gave under his fingers, and the boys heard a faint click. The entire wall above the mantel moved slightly. "A secret door," said Jupiter. Somehow that makes sense." He stepped down from his chair, took hold of the ornate molding that edged the wall panel, and tugged. The panel swung out on well-oiled hinges. The boys crowded close to look into a compartment that was almost 6 inches deep. There were 4 shelves between the mantel and the ceiling, and they were piled with papers. Jupiter lifted one out. "Why, they're only old copies of the Bellevue Register and Tribune," exclaimed Tom. He took the paper from Jupiter's hands and glanced through it. "Hey, this one has a story about me," he said. "What? How did you make the news?" asked Bob. I won an essay contest," said Tom. Jupiter unfolded another paper, a much older one. "Oh, your mother's wedding announcement," he said. There were more. Stories about the birth of a young Tom and the death of his grandmother. There was a story on the grand opening of the Dobson hardware store, and one about a speech of Tom's father had given on Veterans Day. All the doings of the Dobsons had been chronicled in the papers, and the Potters had saved every one. "A secret library," said Pete. "And you and your mother were the big secrets." "Oh, sure makes you feel appreciated," said young Tom. "He was most reticent," said Jupiter. "No one even knew you existed. How odd. What is even more odd is the fact that there's nothing about the Potter himself in this secret library." "Should there be?" said Pete. "He didn't like getting his name on the papers. Not that I could ever recall." "True. And yet the men at Hilltop House yesterday mentioned that accounts of his artistry had appeared in the periodicals. When accounts of your artistry appear in periodicals, the normal thing to do is to save the periodicals, right?" "Yeah, right," said Bob. "So we can assume one of two things," said Jupiter. "Either the Potter does not have even the normal amount of vanity, or there were no accounts in periodicals except for the photo spread in Westways, and the Potter did not even know of that until Saturday. He was not pleased when he saw it." "Meaning?" asked Tom Dobson. "Meaning that the Potter wanted to keep your existence a secret, and the last thing in the world he wanted for himself was acclaim. Perhaps he had very good reasons, Tom. We don't know why, but we learned last night that the two men who have rented Hilltop House are most interested in your grandfather. They appeared in Rocky Beach almost 2 months after the Westways spread came out with your grandfather's photograph. Does this suggest anything to you?" It suggests that Grandpa may have been on the run," said Tom. "But from what?" "Well, do you know anything about Lapathia?" asked Jupiter. No, never heard of it. What is it?" "It's a small country, a small European country, where a political assassination took place many years ago." Tom shrugged. "According to my grandma, my grandfather was from the Ukraine." "Have you ever heard of the name Asimov?" asked Jupiter. Nope." "That could not have been your grandfather's name before he changed it to Potter." No, he had a very long name. It was very long. You couldn't pronounce it." Jupiter stood, pulling at his lip. "He went to a lot of trouble to hide a bunch of old newspapers," said Tom. "He could have done it much easier. If it was all that important, he could have just stuck them in a file with some old bills, like the Purloined Letter by Edgar Allan Poe." Pete put a hand to the heavy plaque. "Yeah, that would have made more sense," he said. "A thing like this in an empty room is bound to attract attention if you're looking for attention. And he wasn't," said Jupiter. "It was the last thing in the world he wanted." Jupiter bent to examine the fireplace beneath the mantel. It was spotless. Obviously, no one had ever lit a fire in it. Jup went down on his knees and peered inside, looking up. "There's no chimney," he announced. "This fireplace is a sham." "Oh, yeah, the Potter probably built it himself," guessed Bob. "Well, in that case, why is this little trap here?" said Jupiter. He lifted a small metal flap which had been built into the floor of the fireplace. "When you have a real fireplace, you have one of these to sweep the ashes out. Why put one in a false fireplace where there will never be ashes?" Jupiter squeezed his hand into the opening of the brick floor on the fireplace. He touched paper. "Hey, there's something here," he cried. "It's in an envelope," and he edged it out and let the little metal trap clank shut. It was a brown manila envelope sealed with a large blob of red wax. The other secret library behind the plaque was a decoy, Jupiter decided. He held up the envelope. I think the real secret is here. Well, Tom, what do we do now? It belongs to your grandfather, and he's missing. You're our client. What should we do? We open it, said Tom without hesitation. I was hoping you'd say that, murmured Bob. Jupiter broke the seal on the envelope. Well? Tom said. Jupiter took out a single sheet of heavy parchment, which had been folded 3 times. He unfolded it with great care. Well, what is it? Asked Tom. Jupiter frowned. I don't know. It's a certificate of some kind. It looks like a diploma or a degree, except that it's not big enough. The boys crowded around Jupiter. Hey, what kind of language is that? Asked Pete. Bob shook his head. Beats me, he said. I never saw anything like it before. Jupiter went to the window and held the hand-lettered document close to his eyes. I can only recognize 2 things, he announced after a few moments. One is the seal at the bottom. It's our old friend, the 2-headed eagle. The other is a name. It's Karenov. Someone at some time conferred some honor on one Alexis Karenov. Have you ever heard that name, Tom? No, said Tom. It couldn't have been grandfather. Like I said, his name was real long. You recall the name, Bob, don't you? Said Jupiter. You bet I do, said Bob. Karenov was an artisan who created the crown for Frederick Asimov. Tom stared from one of them to the other. Frederick Asimov? Who's he? He was the first king of Lapathia, Jupiter told him. He lived 400 years ago. Tom Dobson stared at the investigators. But what would that have to do with my grandfather? He asked. We don't know, said Jupiter, but we intend to find out. Chapter 13, The Odd Eagle. Jupiter Jones piled the copies of the Bellevue newspaper neatly on the shelves in the compartment above the fireplace and swung the panel closed. Your mother will be back any moment, Jupiter said, and I imagine Chief Reynolds will be with her. I have a strong feeling that we would be doing your grandfather a disservice if we turned the document we found over to the chief. The 3 investigators are following on certain lines of inquiry having to do with Lapathia and the royal family of the Asimovs. Do you agree, Tom, that we should be allowed to continue these until we have real evidence to present to the police? Tom scratched his head in bewilderment. Wherever you are, you're way ahead of me, he said. Okay, look, you keep the paper for the time being. What about those newspapers behind the plaque? It's possible that the police will discover the secret compartment, said Jupiter. If so, there can be no harm done. I believe that is what the compartment was built for, to draw attention away from the real secret. I sure hope I get to meet my grandfather before this is all over, said Tom. He must be a real character. It will be an interesting experience, Jupiter promised him. Bob looked out the window. Here comes Miss Dobson now, he reported. Chief Reynolds is with her, asked Jupiter. There's a squad car right behind her, said Bob. Oh my gosh, the dishes, cried Pete. Indeed, said Jupiter Jones, and the boys dashed down the stairs. By the time Miss Dobson had parked and crossed the yard to the front door, Jupiter was running hot water into the sink. Tom was frantically scraping plates, and Bob stood by with a towel. Oh, how nice, said Mrs. Dobson when she saw the activity in the kitchen. Delicious breakfast, Mrs. Dobson, said Pete. Chief Reynolds, followed by Officer Haynes, stalked into the kitchen after Mrs. Dobson. He ignored the other boys and focused his wrath on Jupiter. Why didn't you call me last night? He demanded. Mrs. Potter was upset, said Jupiter. And since when were you on a member of the Ladies' Aid Society? Demanded the chief. Jupiter Jones, one of these days you're going to get your fat head knocked clean off. Yes, sir, agreed Jupe. Flaming footprints, snorted the chief. He turned to Haynes. Search the house, he ordered. We did that, Chief, Jupiter reported. There wasn't anyone here. Well, mind if we do it our way? Said the chief. No, sir. And get out, will you? Said the irate police chief. Go on, play baseball or whatever it is normal kids do. The boys fled to the yard. Wow, is he always that grumpy? Tom asked. Only when Jupe doesn't let him in on things, said Bob. That figures. Tom sat down on the steps between the two huge urns, which were banded with double-headed eagles. Jupiter frowned at one of the urns. Hey, what's your problem? Said Bob. One of these eagles has only one head, said Jupiter, puzzled. The boys crowded around the urn. It was true. One of the birds in the bright band which decorated the piece was missing a head, the right-hand head. It looked like an ordinary, one-headed creature gazing off to the left. Interesting, said Jupiter. Bob circled the other vase, examining the band of eagles. All these have two heads, he reported. Maybe my grandfather made a mistake, said Tom. The potter does not make such mistakes as this, said Jupiter. His designs are always perfect. If he intended to put a band of double-headed eagles on this urn, he would have done so. It could be another decoy, said Bob, like that secret compartment in the bedroom. Is there any link? Jupiter tried to lift off the top of the urn. It didn't budge. He tried to unscrew it. It didn't unscrew. He examined the sides of the piece and the pedestal, which was cemented in place on the steps. He pressed on the single-headed eagle as he had pressed on the eye embedded in the plaque. Nothing gave way. Oh, really a decoy, he murmured. It never intended to be open. Chief Reynolds came out on the porch. If I didn't know any better, he announced to anyone who cared to listen, I'd say the place was haunted. It's mysterious, Jupiter agreed. He went on to tell the chief of the strange chemical odor he had detected on the newly burned footprints. Was it anything you recognized? Asked the chief. Paraffin? Anything like that? No, said Jupiter. It was entirely unfamiliar, a sharp acid smell. Said the chief. The lab has samples of the charred linoleum. Maybe they can find something out. You boys have anything else you can tell me about this thing? The three investigators looked at one another, and then Tom Dobson. No, sir, said Tom. Then you can leave, said the chief rather curtly. Right, agreed Bob. I have to go home and change my clothes and get to the library. Jupiter made for his bicycle. Aunt Matilda will be wondering, he said. The three investigators waved a hasty goodbye to Tom Dobson and started down the highway towards Rocky Beach. At the intersection near the Jones salvage yard, Jupiter pulled his bike to the curb. The other two boys also stopped. I wonder if the Jolly Fisherman is connected with the disturbances, said Jupiter. He's just a creep, declared Pete. Yeah, perhaps, said Jupiter. However, he has a way of being around just before things happen, or just after. He was parked across from the potter when the house was searched and I was knocked down. He attempted to call on Miss Dobson last evening, and long before the second set of flaming footprints appeared. He could have been the man who shot at us from the hillside. We are sure the two men at Hilltop House didn't do that. But why would he? Asked Pete. Who knows? Said Jupiter. Perhaps he's a confederate of the men at the Hilltop House. If we could solve the secret of the potter, we might know many things. Jupe reached into his pocket and took out the document he had discovered in the dummy fireplace. Here, he handed it to Bob. Is there any possibility you can identify the language on this parchment, or perhaps even translate it? Yeah, I'm willing to bet it's in Lepathian, said Bob. I'll see what I can do. Good. And also, if we could find out more about the Asimovs, it could be helpful. The name Krenov on that document is most provocative. Oh yeah, the crown maker. Right, I'll try. Bob pocketed the envelope and wrote on. Hey, what time is it? Pete asked nervously. My mom will be having a fit. It's only 9, said Jupiter. Will she be so worried? I thought we might pay a visit to Miss Hopper. At the Seabreeze Inn? What's she got to do with it? Not a thing. She is, however, the landlady of that jolly fisherman, and she usually takes an acute interest in the welfare of her guests. Okay, said Pete. Let's see her. But let's not be all day about it. I want to get home before Mom starts phoning your Aunt Matilda. Yeah, that would be wise, said Jupiter. The boys found Miss Hopper in the lobby of the Seabreeze Inn, in a worried consultation with Marie, the maid. It can't be helped, Miss Hopper was saying. You'll just have to skip 113 and come back to it after lunch. Yeah, serve him right if I skipped it altogether, snapped Marie, and she banged out of the lobby, pushing her cart with cleaning utensils in front of her. Is something wrong, Miss Hopper? Said Jupiter. Oh, Jupiter and Pete, good morning. It's nothing important, really. It's only that Mr. Farrier has a do not disturb sign on his door, and Marie can't get into his room. It always upsets her when she can't follow her regular routine. Miss Hopper hesitated for a moment, and then said with a touch of shyness, I heard Mr. Farrier came in late last night. Well, actually it was this morning. 3 o'clock this morning. That's interesting, said Jupiter. Most fishermen are early morning people. I've always understood that, said Miss Hopper. Mr. Farrier was so attentive to young Miss Dobson yesterday, I wondered if he might not be helping her get settled. Until 3 in the morning? Exclaimed Pete. No, Miss Hopper, said Jupiter. We've just come from the Potters, and Mr. Farrier did not spend the evening with Miss Dobson. Now where do you suppose that man could have been until that hour? Wondered Miss Hopper. Well, it's his own concern, I'm sure. And how is poor dear Miss Dobson this morning? I saw her drive by earlier. Well, she is reasonably well under the circumstances. She came into town to file an official report with Chief Reynolds. She wants her father found. Jupiter had no hesitation about confiding this much to Miss Hopper, who always found out things anyway. Most proper, said Miss Hopper. What a strange thing for the Potter to do, going off that way without a word to anyone. But then, he always has been a strange man. Yeah, that's for sure, said Pete. Well, we must be going, Miss Hopper, said Jupiter. We only thought you'd like to know that Miss Dobson and her son are settled in at the Potter's house. You always take such an interest in your guests. Oh, how nice of you, Jupiter, said Miss Hopper. And I hope Mr. Farrier wakes up before lunch. It would make Marie happy, said Miss Hopper. Poor man, one shouldn't be too hard on him. He has such dreadful luck. Oh? Prompted Jupiter. Well, yes, he's been here 4 days just for the fishing, and he hasn't caught one thing. That's terribly frustrating, said Jupiter, and he and Pete took their leave of Miss Hopper. Now, where do you go at 3 in the morning in Rocky Beach? Asked Pete once they were outside. Well, several places occur to me, said Jupiter. One could, of course, try fishing by moonlight. Or perhaps one could be waiting on a hillside with a gun. Or one might amuse oneself by frightening people with flaming footprints. Yeah, I might buy that last one, said Pete. If there was any way he could have gotten into that house, Jupe, all the downstairs windows are locked, and most of them are painted shut. There are 2 locks and a bolt on the front door, and the 1 regular lock and a deadbolt lock on the back. He couldn't have gotten in. Well, someone did, Jupiter pointed out. Well, for my money, only one person could, said Pete. The Potter would be the only one with keys. Which brings us back to the question of why, Jupiter reminded him. Maybe he just doesn't like house guests, said Pete. You know that's ridiculous, said Jupiter. Well, the alternative's even sillier, said Pete. He's gone off and kicked the bucket someplace, and then come back to haunt the house. And with that, Pete mounted his bicycle and pedaled away towards his home. Jupiter returned to the Jones salvage yard to confront an anxious Aunt Matilda and a concerned Uncle Titus. How is Miss Dobson? Was Aunt Matilda's first question. She's better this morning, Jupiter reported. Last night she was extremely emotional, not to say hysterical. Why? Asked Uncle Titus. Well, there was a second set of those flaming footprints, said Jupiter, on the stairs this time. Merciful gracious to heavens, cried Aunt Matilda. And she still insisted on staying in that house? Aunt Matilda, I do not believe she was in any condition to move last night, said Jupiter. Jupiter, you should have told me, scolded Aunt Matilda. She turned to her husband. Titus Andronicus Jones? Uncle Titus always paid strict attention when he was addressed by all three of his names. Yes, Matilda, he said. Get the truck. We must go up there and persuade that poor misguided child to get out of that terrible house before something happens to her. Uncle Titus started for the truck. As for you, Jupiter, said Aunt Matilda severely, I am very much annoyed with you. You take too much upon yourself. What you need is some good work to keep you out of mischief. Jupiter didn't answer this. Aunt Matilda was an ardent advocate of work even when there was no mischief afoot. There are those marble garden ornaments your uncle bought from that ruined house in Beverly Hills, said Aunt Matilda. They're absolutely filthy. You know where the bucket is, and the soap. Yes, Aunt Matilda, said Jupiter. Yeah, and use plenty of elbow grease, and ordered his aunt. Aunt Matilda and Uncle Titus clattered away in the truck. Jupiter cleared a space in the back of the salvage yard and set to work with hot soapy water on the marble figures and the golden urns. The things were coated with years of soil and grit and mold. Jupiter scrubbed away, cleaning the face of a chubby cherub who held an apple. Hans found him there. I see your aunt has been talking to you, said Hans, eyeing the scrubbing brush in the bucket. Jupiter nodded, wiped off the marble cherub, and turned to a bulging urn with grape clusters on its side. Where is everybody? Hans wanted to know. I've been over at the house and nobody there. Nobody in office either. Aunt Matilda and Uncle Titus have gone to the Potter's house to see Miss Dobson, reported Jupiter. Huh, said Hans. I don't go to that place. Not for $1 million. That place is haunted. That crazy Potter. He's walking around up there in his bare feet. You saw it. I saw it. Jupiter sat back on his heels. We saw the footprints, he reminded Hans. We didn't see the Potter. Who else could it be? Demanded Hans. Jupiter didn't answer. He stared at the urn, which was an ungainly piece, and he thought of the Potter, which made such handsome things. The urns on the Potter's porch are much better than this one, said Jupiter. Yap, his stuff's good, but he was crazy anyway. Oh, no, I don't think so, said Jupiter. But I wonder why one of the eagles on that urn has only one head. Nothing wrong with the one head on one eagle, declared Hans. True, except that the Potter seemed to prefer them with two, answered Jupiter Jones.